He thought my compliance report was just paperwork. 30 days later, it became the $750,000 bullet that ended his career, and I never even raised my voice. Marcus Doyle, our new COO, had laughed in my face when I presented those vendor violations, called me overly sensitive in front of 12 executives. But while he was busy flexing his authority, I was building something far more dangerous than a grudge. I was building a paper trail. My name is Erin Calloway, and at 38, I'd spent 12 years climbing the corporate ladder at Northgate Capital, a mid-tier financial services firm that managed just enough billions to matter, but not enough to make headlines. Senior Compliance Specialist, that was my title, printed on business cards. I rarely hand it out because nobody at cocktail parties wants to talk to the person whose job is saying no. The conference room on the 42nd floor always smelled like burnt coffee and anxiety. That Tuesday morning in April was no different. Fluorescent lights hummed their familiar drone, casting everyone in that particular shade of corporate pallor that made us all look vaguely ill. I'd arrived 15 minutes early to set up my quarterly review presentation, arranging printed copies of my findings at each seat like place settings at a funeral. Marcus Doyle swept in at 9:03, 3 minutes late, trailing cologne and arrogance. Our new chief operating officer had been with us for exactly 91 days. I knew because I'd been counting. He wore his Harvard MBA-like armor and had that particular swagger of men who'd never been told they were wrong by anyone who mattered. "Morning, team," he announced, though half the seats were still empty. "Let's make this quick. I've got real work to do." Real work, as if ensuring our firm didn't violate federal regulations was some kind of hobby. I stood, clicked to my first slide, and began. This quarter's compliance review has identified several critical issues requiring immediate attention. The slide showed a heat map of violations, vendor documentation gaps, suspicious consulting fees, system overrides. Red dominated the screen like spilled wine. First, we have 17 vendor contracts initiated in the last quarter lacking proper due diligence documentation. These vendors were fast-tracked through our approval process with incomplete background checks. Marcus's fingers drummed against the mahogany table. "Fast-tracked because I authorized it. We're not running a government agency here. Erin," I continued, voice steady. "Second, consulting fees totaling $2.3 million were approved without documented deliverables. The invoices reference strategic advisory services with no specifics." "Strategic advisors don't itemize their brilliance," Marcus interrupted. "That's why they're strategic." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, the kind that come when people don't know whether to side with power or protocol. I clicked to the next slide. Third, and most concerning, someone with executive-level access has been deleting risk flags from our vendor management system. 43 flags removed in the past 30 days. The room went silent. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to pause. Marcus leaned back, a smile playing at his lips. "You know what your problem is, Erin. You're too sensitive. You see conspiracies where there's just efficiency. Maybe those flags were false positives. Maybe those vendors are solid partners who don't need a colonoscopy-level background check. Maybe," he gestured at my stack of reports, "maybe we should focus on making money instead of making paperwork." He turned to address the room. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that's been holding Northgate back. Analysis paralysis, death by compliance." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but kept my expression neutral. "The Securities Exchange Act requires—" "I know what it requires," Marcus cut me off. "I also know what business requires. And right now, business requires us to move fast and break things. Things like federal law." The words escaped before I could stop them. His smile widened. "Drama doesn't suit you. Erin, tell you what, why don't you file your little report, check your boxes, and let the adults handle the real decisions?" The dismissal was clear. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact. "Of course, I'll file the complete report in our compliance repository, as required." "You do that," he said, already turning to his phone. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that filing that report in our compliance repository triggered something beyond a simple archive entry. It started a 30-day clock under SEC whistleblower provisions. 30 days for internal remediation before I could legitimately escalate beyond these walls. As I walked back to my desk, papers clutched against my chest. I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, some relieved it wasn't them, some already calculating their distance from whatever was about to unfold. Marcus Doyle thought he'd won. He thought he'd put the compliance lady in her place with his Harvard words and his C-suite authority. But I'd been in this business long enough to know that the most dangerous person in any organization isn't the one who yells the loudest. It's the one who documents everything. And I was very, very good at documentation. The walk back to my desk felt longer than usual, my heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. The open-plan office sprawled before me, a maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices where everyone could see everything and nothing all at once. I set my rejected presentation materials on my desk with deliberate calm, then sat down and opened my bottom drawer. Behind a box of tea bags and expired cough drops sat an unmarked folder, innocuous as a phone book. Q3 Contingency Plan, read the label boring enough to repel curious eyes. Inside was my insurance policy. I'd started the folder 6 weeks ago, the day after Marcus's first all-hands meeting where he'd announced his revolutionary approach to vendor partnerships. Something in the way he'd said, revolutionary like compliance was a disease to be cured, had triggered every instinct I'd developed over 12 years in this business. The folder already contained 14 documents, vendor contracts pushed through without proper vetting, emails where procurement's concerns were dismissed, system logs showing manual override of risk flags. Each document was time-stamped, printed on the good paper, the kind that wouldn't fade or smudge, the kind that would look compelling in a deposition. I pulled up my email and began typing. Dear Melinda, per our discussion in this morning's quarterly compliance review, I want to confirm my understanding of the COO's directive regarding vendor approval processes. As I understood it, Mr. Doyle indicated that standard due diligence procedures should be abbreviated in favor of processing speed. Could you please confirm this interpretation? I want to ensure our meeting minutes accurately reflect leadership's position. Best regards, Aaron. Melinda was Marcus's executive assistant, sharp, ambitious, and most importantly, meticulous about email documentation. She'd reply within the hour, probably with some carefully worded confirmation that would become Exhibit A in my growing collection. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number that I recognized immediately. Marissa Trent never saved her work contacts under real names. Free for coffee, usual place, 20 minutes. The usual place was a Starbucks 3 blocks away, far enough from Northgate's building that we wouldn't run into colleagues. I grabbed my purse, told my team I was taking an early lunch, and headed for the elevators. Marissa was already there when I arrived, stationed at a corner table with 2 cups waiting, 5'2" of compressed legal energy wrapped in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. We'd met in law school, back when I still thought I'd practice instead of just using the degree as corporate armor. You look like someone just kicked your puppy, she said by way of greeting. More like someone's kicking the entire kennel. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. Remember that new COO I mentioned? Harvard boy with the God complex. That's the one. He just turned my quarterly compliance review into a comedy show, told me I was too sensitive, in front of the entire leadership team. Marissa's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly on her cup. What kind of compliance issues are we talking about? Vendor approvals without documentation, deleted risk flags, consulting fees with no deliverables, the kind of stuff that makes SEC investigators salivate. And you've documented this. I smiled for the first time that day. What do you think? I think, Marissa said slowly, that you should be very careful and very thorough. The 30-day internal remediation window under Dodd-Frank starts from your first formal report filing, not from verbal presentations. The quarterly review report was filed in our compliance repository at 9:47 this morning. Smart girl. She pulled out her phone, did some quick calculations. So you have until May 15th before you can go external. That's assuming that internal remediation efforts fail or are non-existent, which, given this morning's performance, seems likely. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the Tuesday lunch crowd filter in and out. Normal people with normal jobs. not planning the potential downfall of a C-suite executive over overpriced coffee. If you do this, Marissa said finally, it has to be bulletproof. Every document authenticated, every email preserved with full headers, every system log showing access history. They'll come at you with everything, claim you're disgruntled, say you misunderstood, argue you're overreaching your authority. I know. They'll make your life hell, even with whistleblower protections. They'll find ways. Suddenly your performance reviews will slip. Your projects will get reassigned. You'll become radioactive. I know. And if you're wrong, if there's an innocent explanation for all of this, your career at Northgate is over. Maybe your career in finance, period. I met her eyes. I'm not wrong. You should see these vendors. Marissa, shell companies with addresses that trace to empty lots. Consulting firms that didn't exist until the week before we hired them. Someone's either grossly incompetent or building a very expensive pipeline to nowhere. Or somewhere, she corrected. The question is where, and who's on the other end? My phone buzzed. Melinda had replied to my email. Her response a masterclass in corporate communication. Per the COO's guidance in today's meeting, the focus should be on expediting vendor partnerships to support Q3 growth targets. Mr. Doyle emphasized that traditional procedures should be streamlined where possible to maintain competitive advantage. I showed Marissa the screen. She whistled low. That's beautiful. Vague enough to claim misinterpretation. Specific enough to hang him with. So what now? Now, Marissa pushed a business card across the table. Not hers, I already had dozens of those. This one was plain white, just a name and number. You call this guy if you need to set up a secure communication channel. He specializes in corporate whistleblower protection. Use a burner phone. Don't call from your office or home. I pocketed the card. You think it'll come to that? I think Marcus Doyle sounds like a man who's used to getting what he wants. And what he wants appears to be a complete dismantling of your company's financial controls. She stood, gathering her things. Document everything. Aaron, every meeting, every email, every sideways glance. Build your case like you're going to war. Maybe I am. No, maybe about it. You filed that report. The clock is ticking. In 30 days. You're either going to be vindicated or unemployed. She paused at the door. Possibly both. I walked back to the office slowly, letting the spring air clear my head. 30 days. It seemed like both forever and no time at all. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with another email, this one from our vendor management system. Another approval pushed through, another red flag ignored. I forwarded it to my personal email, adding it to the folder I'd started there. Q3 contingency plan had another name in my personal files, the paper trail. Every document told a story. Every email built the narrative. Every override and approval and deleted flag was another brick in the wall I was building around Marcus Doyle. He thought this morning was a victory. He thought he'd put me in my place, turned me into a joke, neutralized the threat. But Marcus had made a crucial error, the kind they probably didn't teach at Harvard Business School. He'd underestimated the senior compliance specialist. And in my experience, that was the kind of mistake that cost more than money. It cost everything. Day 29. The post-it note on my monitor edge had become my morning ritual, each number smaller than the last, counting down like a timer on a bomb only I could see. 29 days since I'd filed that report. 29 days of watching Marcus Doyle dismantle every safety rail our compliance department had built over a decade. The office felt different in those early morning hours before the 42nd floor filled with bodies and ambition. I'd started arriving at 6:30 a.m. not out of dedication, but because I needed the quiet to work. Real work, the kind that would matter when the music stopped. My encrypted USB drive, a sleek black thing no bigger than my thumb, had become my most valuable possession. Each morning, I'd plug it in, update my files, and slip it back into my jacket pocket. The folder structure had grown sophisticated. Q3 vendors, deleted flags, override logs, executive approvals, subfolders within subfolders, each document named with the precision of someone who knew they'd need to find it quickly someday. Marcus had grown bolder. Yesterday's vendor approval had been almost comical in its transparency. A company called Strategic Solutions, LLC, registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. Website created 6 days ago. No employees on LinkedIn. Approved for a $400,000 contract in under 48 hours. The email chain showed Marcus overriding 3 separate flags from the procurement team. I screenshot everything, saved it, backed it up. The USB wasn't my only insurance. I'd learned from a former colleague now at the SEC that redundancy was survival, cloud storage under a personal account, printed copies in a safety deposit box I'd rented at a bank Marcus had never heard of, even photos on an old digital camera, because sometimes the most outdated methods were the most secure. Morning, Aaron. I minimized my screen instinctively, though Tom from IT was harmless, overworked, underpaid, and currently carrying 2 cups of coffee. Morning, Tom. Early day for you, too. He grimaced. System maintenance ran over. Been here since midnight. He paused, glancing around the empty floor. Hey, weird question, but has anyone asked you about access logs lately? My fingers stilled on the keyboard. No. Why? Someone's been pulling reports on who's accessing what. Specifically in the vendor management system. Just wanted to give you a heads up, your name's come up a lot. I forced a casual smile. That's literally my job, Tom. Yeah, I know. He shifted his weight. Uncomfortable. Just be careful. Okay, the queries are coming from pretty high up. After he left, I sat in the growing morning light, processing. They were watching me watch them, but that was fine. Everything I'd done was within my job description. Using my authorized access. I wasn't hacking or stealing, I was documenting. There was a crucial difference. Day 25. Marcus announced a new vendor fast-track initiative in the all-hands meeting. We're cutting approval time by 75%, he declared, standing beneath a PowerPoint slide that might as well have read, Federal violations welcome here. I took notes in my leather portfolio, pen moving steadily, date, time, exact quotes, witnesses present. The woman next to me, Janet from accounting, shifted nervously as Marcus explained how financial reviews would now be post-approval optimization opportunities, rather than pre-approval requirements. That afternoon, I created a timeline, a beautiful, damning thing that traced every decision, every override, every deleted flag back to specific individuals on specific dates. The pattern was clear. This wasn't incompetence or aggressive business tactics. This was systematic dismantling of controls. Day 18. I found myself in the elevator with Richard Hanley, our CEO. He nodded politely, the kind of acknowledgement that said he knew my face but not my name. Aaron Calloway, compliance, I offered. Of course. How are things in your department? It would have been so easy to tell him right then, to bypass Marcus entirely, but I'd learned the hard way that hierarchy mattered in corporations. Going around Marcus without following protocol would make me the villain, not him. I needed those 30 days. I needed the process. Busy, I said simply, but manageable. Day 10. The vendor approvals were coming fast now, sometimes 3 or 4 a day. Shell companies with Gmail addresses, consulting firms with no consultants, marketing agencies that had never marketed anything, each one approved in hours, pushing millions of dollars to entities that existed more on paper than in reality. I cross-referenced everything, connected dots. The deleted flags weren't random, they followed a pattern, always removed within hours of being generated, always by the same executive-level access credentials. The consulting fees weren't just vague, they were being paid to companies registered in the same week the contracts were signed. My documentation had evolved from a folder to a case file, from a case file to an indictment. Day 3. Almost there. My post-it note felt heavier than it should. This tiny yellow square holding the weight of what was coming. I'd started having dreams about spreadsheets and audit trails, waking up at 3 a.m. with connections my subconscious had made while I slept. The USB drive never left my person now. I'd even started wearing jackets with zip pockets, the kind of paranoid behavior that would have seemed ridiculous 6 months ago. But 6 months ago, I hadn't been documenting what might be the largest compliance breach in Northgate's history. Marcus passed my desk that afternoon, pausing just long enough to make his presence felt. Still fighting the good fight, Aaron. Every day, I replied, meeting his eyes. Good, good, he smiled, that Harvard smile that had probably opened 1,000 doors. Keep up the Lord's work. After he left, I pulled up my master timeline one more time. every entry tagged, dated, cross-referenced, every piece of evidence in triplicate, stored in different locations, formats, methods. My computer screen reflected my face in the gaps between data, and I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Harder, sharper, ready. Day 1. Tomorrow. The clock would hit 0. Tomorrow. I would package everything into a format that lawyers dream about: clear, comprehensive, irrefutable. Tomorrow. Marissa would receive a FedEx package that would change everything. But tonight, I sat in my empty office as the sun set over the city, backing up my files one last time. The USB drive pulsed with its tiny LED light as data transferred months of work, hundreds of documents, thousands of careful decisions distilled into gigabytes of truth. Marcus Doyle thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He was wrong about the game entirely. I wasn't playing anything. I was building a case. And in 24 hours, I would file it. The first sign that others were noticing came from an unexpected source. Jenna Morales knocked on my office doorframe. I didn't have walls. Just the suggestion of privacy in our open-plan purgatory, holding a manila folder like it might explode. "Aaron, do you have a minute?" Jenna was 26, fresh from her MBA, and had that hungry look of someone who still believed corporate America was a meritocracy. She'd joined my team 3 months ago, right around the time Marcus had started his vendor revolution. "Always. What's on your mind?" She closed the imaginary door behind her and sat down, placing the folder carefully on my desk. "I've been reviewing the new vendor accounts as part of my training, and I found something concerning." I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse quickened. "Walk me through it." "Global Tech Innovations, approved last week for cybersecurity consulting, $2 million contract." She opened the folder, revealing printed screenshots. They claimed to have ISO 27001 certification, but when I checked the registry, nothing. Their website says they've been in business since 2019, but their domain was registered 17 days ago. I studied the documents, though I already had Global Tech in my files. What I hadn't expected was for Jenna to catch it independently. "Good work. What else?" "That's the thing," she lowered her voice, glancing around the empty cubicles nearby. "When I flagged it in the system yesterday, the flag disappeared overnight. I thought I'd made a mistake, so I flagged it again this morning, gone within 2 hours." "Did you document the flags before they disappeared?" A small smile. "Screenshots. Time-stamped. I even recorded my screen the second time, just to make sure I wasn't crazy." I wanted to hug her. Instead, I leaned back, choosing my words carefully. "Jenna, what you found is important, but it's also sensitive. I need you to continue documenting everything, every irregularity, every disappeared flag, every questionable approval, but quietly. Don't discuss this with anyone else on the team yet." "Is this connected to what happened in the quarterly review? Everyone's talking about how Marcus shut you down." The corporate gossip mill worked faster than our approval processes. Apparently. "Let's just say your findings align with some concerns I've raised. Keep building your documentation. Save everything in multiple formats. And Jenna." I met her eyes. "Be careful. Use your personal devices for backup storage, not the company systems." She nodded, understanding flickering across her face. "Like building a case file." "Like doing thorough analysis," I corrected gently. "We're analysts. We analyze." After she left, I added her findings to my growing collection. Having corroboration from another team member strengthened everything. Jenna didn't know it, but she'd just become a key witness in a case that hadn't been filed yet. The whispers started 2 days later, hushed conversations that died when I walked by. Meaningful looks exchanged over cubicle walls. The head of internal audit had been spotted on our floor 3 times in one day. Notable because Harold Yamamoto usually avoided the 42nd floor like it was contaminated. "Heard anything interesting?" I asked Ray from accounting during our regular coffee run. Ray had been at Northgate for 15 years and had survived 4 CEOs and countless reorganizations. He knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. "Depends." He stirred sugar into his coffee with mechanical precision. "You hear about the external auditors?" "What about them?" "Unscheduled visit next week, supposedly routine, but nobody schedules routine for the middle of Q2. He glanced at me sideways. Word is, they're particularly interested in vendor management processes. I kept my face carefully neutral. Interesting timing. Isn't it just... Ray took a sip, grimaced at the temperature. You know, I've been running P&L reports for the new vendor accounts. The payment patterns are unusual. Unusual how? Wire transfers to offshore accounts, multiple subsidiaries that all trace back to the same registered agent in Delaware, payment terms that don't match standard contracts. He paused. The kind of patterns that make an old accountant's spidey sense tingle. Have you flagged these concerns? 3 times. Guess what happens to my flags? They disappear. Like morning mist, he chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Funny thing about deleted flags, though, they're never really gone. System keeps an archive log if you know where to look. Server side, not accessible through the regular interface. I filed that information away. Good to know. Thought it might be. Ray checked his watch. I should get back. But Aaron, whatever you're not doing, keep not doing it carefully. That afternoon, another knock on my non-existent door. This time it was Dennis Liu, our Chief Information Security Officer, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past month. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Not here. We walked to the emergency stairwell, the only place on the floor guaranteed to be free of cameras and potential eavesdroppers. Dennis checked both directions before speaking. Someone's been accessing the vendor database with executive credentials at 3 a.m., repeatedly, deleting entries, modifying approval dates, scrubbing audit trails. Can you trace who? The credentials. Yes, the actual person. He shook his head. Executive accounts can be accessed from any terminal, but the pattern is consistent. Someone's cleaning house, and they're getting sloppy. They missed some backup logs. Do you have copies? Dennis pulled out a USB drive, similar to mine but red instead of black. Everything from the past 60 days, user logs, deletion records, modification history. I was planning to report it, but he trailed off. But you wanted to make sure it went to someone who would actually do something about it. Marcus called me last week, wanted to know if we could implement more flexible security protocols for vendor screening, said the current system was hindering business growth. Dennis handed me the drive. I've been in this business 20 years. I know what cleaning house looks like. This isn't my first rodeo, but it might be my last at Northgate if this goes where I think it's going. It might be all of ours, I admitted. Maybe, but some things are worth the risk. He opened the stairwell door, paused. Oh, and Aaron. You might want to know that legal pulled all the whistleblower protection policies yesterday for review and updating. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? After he left, I stood in the stairwell for a moment, feeling the weight of the USB drive. 3 independent sources now, all seeing the same patterns, all reaching the same conclusions. The whispers were becoming a chorus. Back at my desk, I found an email from Jenna. Found 3 more, same pattern, Delaware registration, no real presence, cybersecurity services, contracts total 5.4 AMPAs, flags deleted within hours. I have everything documented. I locked both USB drives in my desk drawer, though they'd be moved to my safety deposit box by end of day. The paper trail was becoming a paper highway, and all roads led back to Marcus Doyle. 21 days left on my countdown, but something told me I wouldn't need all of them. The internal machinery was already grinding into motion, triggered by too many questions from too many directions. Marcus had wanted to move fast and break things. He was about to learn that some things, once broken, cut both ways. Day 0, May 15th. The post-it note on my monitor was gone, crumpled in my wastebasket beneath coffee grounds and a banana peel plausible deniability for the paranoid. 30 days had passed since Marcus Doyle had laughed at my compliance concerns. 30 days of building what Marissa would later call the most beautiful prosecutorial package she'd ever seen from a corporate whistleblower. I arrived at the office at 5:45 a.m., before even the security guards had finished their rounds. The printing had been done at home, on a laser printer I'd bought specifically for this purpose. 6 copies of everything, organized into identical binders, one for Marissa, one for the SEC, one for my safety deposit box, one for a trusted friend who didn't know what they were holding, 2 more hidden in places Marcus would never think to look. The report, I'd started thinking of it in capital letters was 847 pages of documented destruction. Every vendor, every override, every deleted flag, cross-referenced, footnoted, indexed, Dennis's server logs showing the 3 a.m. deletions, Jenna's screen recordings of disappearing flags, Ray's financial analysis revealing the offshore payment patterns, my own comprehensive timeline tying it all to specific executives and decisions. But the crown jewel was something I'd discovered just 3 days ago. Buried in the global tech contract details, a signature page that Marcus had apparently forgotten existed, explicitly authorizing the override of all standard compliance protocols for this vendor, his actual handwriting, his actual words, his actual hubris preserved in blue ink. At exactly 8:00 a.m., I walked to the FedEx office 2 blocks away. The clerk, a woman named Patricia, who'd seen me often enough to remember my name, raised an eyebrow at the weight of the package. "Important documents," she asked, processing the overnight delivery to Marissa's law firm. "You could say that." "Signature required on delivery." "Absolutely, and I'll need a tracking number." By 8:30 I was back at my desk, looking exactly like someone who'd been there since the normal arrival time. The email I'd drafted the night before sat in my drafts folder, waiting. At 9:00 a.m., sharp 1 hour after FedEx confirmed pickup, I hit send. To Marissa Trent, Senior Partner, Trent & Associates, CC, Personal Email Account, RE, Formal Whistleblower Complaint, Northgate Capital Securities Violations. The die was cast. Marissa called at 9:47 a.m. "Received and logged. I'll have the SEC filing prepared by noon. Are you ready for what comes next?" "As ready as anyone can be." "Remember, from this point forward, every communication about this matter goes through me. Every single one. They can't retaliate against you for filing, but they'll try to find other reasons. Document any changes in your treatment, assignments, or access. And Aaron." "Yeah." "Keep your head down and your powder dry. The explosion won't be immediate, but when it comes..." She didn't need to finish. We both knew what happened when the SEC came knocking with an 847-page roadmap to financial violations. The rest of the day passed in surreal normalcy. I attended meetings, reviewed standard contracts, answered emails about routine compliance matters. Nobody knew that I'd just lit a fuse that would burn through the executive suite. Nobody suspected that the quiet woman in the corner cubicle had just weaponized 3 years of legal education and 12 years of corporate experience. At 2:15 p.m., Dennis stopped by my desk. "Funny thing," he said quietly. "All those 3 a.m. database accesses, they stopped 3 days ago, completely, like someone realized they were being watched." "Interesting timing," I murmured. "Isn't it just?" He dropped his voice lower. "Also interesting, Marcus just scheduled an emergency IT security review for next week. Wants to ensure our systems are properly protected. First time he's shown interest in security protocols." Too little, too late. The evidence was already out of the building, out of their reach, out of their control. At 4:45 p.m., as people started their end-of-day shuffle, Jenna appeared with another folder. "Aaron, I know you said to be careful, but I found something else. It's big." I glanced around, then motioned her closer. "How big?" "Remember those deleted flags I documented? I found the pattern. They're not random. Every single deletion happens within 4 hours of creation, always between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Eastern, always using the same executive access code." She pulled out a graph, data points connected in damning clarity. "But here's the thing, Marcus was in London 2 of those nights. The deletions still happened at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, which means someone else has his credentials, or he's authorizing them remotely despite being in meetings. Either way, it showed consciousness of guilt, deliberate action rather than aggressive business tactics. Should I add this to my documentation? I thought quickly. The report was already filed, but this was valuable corroboration. "Yes, everything you have, but Jenna, make sure you have copies stored somewhere safe, somewhere not connected to Northgate." She nodded, understanding dawning. "It's happening, isn't it? Whatever you've been building toward." "I'm just doing my job," I said carefully. "Ensuring compliance with federal regulations." "Right," she smiled. a fierce little expression that reminded me of myself 15 years ago. Just compliance. As 5 p.m. approached, I saved my work, cleared my browser history out of habit, and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would look exactly like today: mundane, routine, forgettable. I'd continue playing the part of the frustrated but ultimately powerless compliance officer, right up until the moment federal investigators walked through Northgate's glass doors. My phone buzzed. A text from Marissa. Filed at 12:47 p.m. Confirmation number SR 2024-3847. Point of no return officially passed. I deleted the text, cleared my message history, and stood to leave. In the reflection of my dark monitor, I caught a glimpse of my face. Same features, same professional mask, but something had changed in the past 30 days. The woman staring back at me looked like someone who'd made peace with whatever came next. Marcus passed me in the hallway, all cologne and confidence. Working late again, Aaron. You should learn to relax. Life's too short to worry so much. You're right, I agreed, stepping into the elevator. Worry doesn't change anything. Exactly, see? You're learning. He flashed that Harvard smile. Have a good evening. You too, Marcus. Enjoy it. The elevator doors closed between us before he could parse the weight in those words. 15 floors down. I emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, just another corporate soldier heading home after another day at the office. Except I wasn't, not anymore. I was a whistleblower now, protected by federal law and armed with 847 pages of evidence. The fuse was lit, burning its way through legal channels and regulatory frameworks toward an explosion that would cost far more than $750,000 before it was over. But Marcus didn't know that yet. He wouldn't, until it was far too late to stop it. The waiting game had begun. The storm announced itself with whispers before the thunder. It started on a Tuesday. 6 days after I'd filed the report, Linda from legal appeared at my desk at 8:15 a.m., her usually perfect poker face showing hairline cracks. Aaron, do you have a moment? Conference room 12. Now, please. Conference room 12 was the fishbowl glass walls on all sides. No privacy. Deliberately chosen for conversations meant to be seen but not heard. I gathered a notepad, pen, and my phone, following Linda's clicking heels across the floor. Inside, I found Thomas Garrett, Northgate's general counsel, looking like he'd aged a decade over the weekend. His usually pristine suit showed wrinkles, and his coffee cup had the look of its third or fourth refill. Sit, he said without preamble. We need to discuss your recent compliance reports. I sat, arranging my face into polite confusion. Which reports? I filed dozens each month. The Q2 vendor analysis, specifically, your concerns about approval processes. He slid a paper across the table, my original report, the one Marcus had dismissed. Can you walk me through your findings? For the next hour, I repeated everything I documented, watching Thomas's face grow progressively grayer. He took notes in his leather portfolio, occasionally exchanging glances with Linda that spoke volumes about their growing panic. Have these concerns been addressed? He asked finally. I've received no formal response to my filing. The 30-day remediation window closed yesterday. Thomas's pen stopped moving. 30-day window. Standard protocol under SEC guidelines. Internal remediation period before external escalation is permitted. I kept my voice steady, professional. It's all outlined in our compliance manual. Section 47B. Linda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went white. Tom, we need to... Not now. He focused on me with the intensity of a man seeing the edge of a cliff. Aaron, I need you to understand something. Any external communication about internal matters without proper authorization could be construed as... I'm well aware of our policies, I interrupted gently. I'm also aware of the Whistleblower Protection Act and the false claims provisions under Dodd-Frank. I assume legal keeps current on federal statutes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Of course, Thomas closed his portfolio with deliberate calm. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. I stood to leave, then paused. Thomas, you might want to check the server logs for the past 60 days, particularly the 3 a.m. entries. Just a suggestion. The storm clouds gathered faster after that. By Wednesday, The 42nd floor felt like a disturbed ant colony. Hushed conversations in corners. Sudden silences when certain names were mentioned. The kind of nervous energy that precedes corporate earthquakes. Dennis found me in the break room. They pulled all my access logs. 10 years of data. Transferred to legal yesterday. Interesting. That's not the interesting part. He glanced around, then leaned closer. External auditors showed up this morning, not the scheduled ones. Different firm entirely. They went straight for procurement and haven't left. Thursday brought more signs. Ray passed my desk with a box of personal items. His 15-year tenure apparently ending with immediate effect. He caught my eye, gave a small nod, and kept walking. The message was clear: the blame game had begun, and they were starting with the little fish. "Don't worry about Ray," Jenna whispered later. "He told me he's been expecting this. Said he's got insurance and a labor attorney on speed dial." Smart man. We all needed insurance in this business. Friday morning, 7:47 a.m. I'd barely logged into my computer when Linda appeared again, this time with backup 2 gentlemen in identical Navy suits who screamed federal authority. "Ms. Calloway." "I'm Agent Richardson, SEC Enforcement Division. This is Agent Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to ask you some questions about vendor approvals at Northgate Capital." I managed to look appropriately surprised. "Of course. Should I contact my attorney?" "That's your right," Agent Richardson said. "Though at this stage, we're simply gathering information. You're not under investigation." The emphasis on "your" wasn't subtle. We commandeered conference room 3, the secure one, no glass walls, for 4 hours. They walked through every detail of my reports, asking precise questions that revealed they'd done their homework. They already knew the answers. They were testing my consistency. "The flags that were deleted," Agent Chen said, flipping through printed screenshots. "Do you know who had the authority to remove them?" "System admin level or above. That's roughly 6 people in the company, including Marcus Doyle." "Yes." "And these vendors, Global Tech, Strategic Solutions. The others, did you personally review their contracts?" "I reviewed what was submitted. The documentation was incomplete." Richardson smiled thinly. "That's one way to put it. We've been unable to locate physical addresses for 7 of these companies. They exist only on paper and in Northgate's payment system." The implications hung in the air like smoke. By noon, the SEC team had expanded. I counted 12 agents setting up in the executive conference room, boxes of documents being wheeled in, computers being imaged. The 42nd floor had become a crime scene, except the yellow tape was metaphorical. Marcus appeared around 2 p.m., striding through the cubicle maze with his usual confidence remarkably intact. He stopped at my desk, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. "Busy day," he said finally. "Seems to be. You know, Aaron, I've been thinking about our conversation from last month, about being too sensitive." His smile was sharp enough to cut. "Maybe you were right to be concerned." "I was just doing my job." "Of course you were." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, when did you decide to burn it all down, before or after I embarrassed you in that meeting?" I met his gaze steadily. "I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus, I file reports. What happens after that is above my pay grade." "Right, of course." He straightened his tie, a gesture that looked more like tightening a noose. "Well, I should get back. Apparently, I have some meetings to attend, with federal agents." He walked away, but I could see the cracks in his armor now. The swagger was forced, the confidence manufactured. He knew the walls were closing in. He just didn't know how fast or from how many directions. At 4:15 p.m., an email went out to all staff from CEO Richard Hanley. Emergency all-hands meeting. Monday morning. Mandatory attendance. The subject line read, "Important organizational updates." Translation heads were about to roll. I saved my work, backed up my files one more time out of habit, and prepared to leave for the weekend. The storm hadn't hit full force yet that would come Monday, but the wind was picking up, and everyone could smell the rain coming. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed. Marissa, texting from a number I didn't recognize. "Saw the news? SEC raid at Northgate. You okay?" I typed back, "Fine, just another day at the office." "Right, Stay strong. The real show starts Monday. The elevator arrived, and I stepped in alongside 3 auditors carrying boxes of seized documents. We rode down in silence. Professionals doing professional things, pretending this was all perfectly normal. But it wasn't normal. It was the beginning of the end for Marcus Doyle and his vendor revolution. The paper trail I'd built was about to bury him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it now. The only question was how many others would go down with him. Monday arrived like a summons I'd been expecting. The email had come Sunday night, 11:47 p.m. The timestamp of someone who'd lost their weekend to emergency meetings, Richard Hanley's executive assistant, writing on behalf of the CEO. Please report to Mr. Hanley's office, 9:30 a.m. sharp. Confidential matter. Legal counsel will be present. I dressed carefully that morning. Navy suit, minimal jewelry, the kind of outfit you wear to depositions and funerals. The 42nd floor was eerily quiet when I arrived at 8:45. Half the desks empty, the other half occupied by people pretending to work while stealing glances at the executive suite. Richard Hanley's office occupied the northwest corner, all glass and mahogany and power views of the city. I'd been inside exactly twice in 12 years, once for my 5-year service award, once for a compliance briefing that he'd attended for exactly 3 minutes before his phone rang. This time was different. "Aaron, please come in." Richard stood behind his desk, looking like a man who'd discovered termites in his foundation. To his right sat Thomas Garrett and Linda from legal. To his left, an empty chair that felt significant in its vacancy, Marcus's usual spot. But the surprise was the laptop open on the coffee table, showing a familiar face, Marissa, joining via secure video link, looking every inch the apex predator in her downtown office. "Good morning, Ms. Calloway," Richard began, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to proceed. In 12 years, I'd never seen him at a loss for words. Thomas took over. "Aaron, we've been made aware of certain communications with external parties regarding internal compliance matters." I sat carefully, smoothing my skirt. "I assume you're referring to my whistleblower complaint filed in accordance with SEC regulations and federal law." The words landed like a grenade. Linda actually flinched. "Your attorney has shared the broad strokes of your concerns," Richard said slowly. "I want you to know that Northgate takes compliance seriously. If there have been lapses—" "With respect," Marissa interrupted from the screen, her voice crisp through the speakers. "This goes well beyond lapses. My client documented systematic dismantling of financial controls, fraudulent vendor approvals, and potential embezzlement exceeding $8 million. Richard's face went gray. $8 million. "Conservative estimate," I said quietly. "Based solely on the vendors I could verify as shell companies. The actual exposure could be significantly higher." "Why didn't you—" Richard stopped himself, probably remembering the meeting where Marcus had publicly humiliated me for raising these exact concerns. "I see." Thomas cleared his throat. "Aaron, we need to understand the full scope. The SEC investigators have been thorough, but they're focused on violations. We need to know about the internal implications. Who else was involved?" "I documented everything," I said. "Every approval, every override, every deleted flag. The SEC has the complete file." "We're not asking about the SEC," Linda said carefully. "We're asking what you know that might not be in those documents, off-the-record observations, suspicions, anything that could help us understand how this happened." I glanced at Marissa's image. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Marcus wasn't working alone," I said. "The pattern of deletions, the timing of approvals, the sophistication of the shell companies, this required inside knowledge of our systems and outside connections to make the money disappear." "Names?" Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. "Check the approval chains. Every fraudulent vendor went through the same path submitted by one of 3 analysts in procurement, fast-tracked by Marcus. Payment authorized by someone in Treasury, the same names, every time." Thomas was taking notes now, writing fast. "The 3 analysts were all hired in the last 6 months, all recommended by Marcus, all with resumes that don't hold up under scrutiny." I pulled out my phone, showing them a screenshot I'd kept. "Sarah Chen, for instance, claims 5 years at Goldman Sachs. They have no record of her employment." Richard stood abruptly, walking to his window. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, making him look older than his 58 years. How long have you known? Suspected since February, documented proof since March, filed formal complaints internally on April 15th, as required by company policy and federal law. And when those complaints were ignored, I followed the procedures outlined in the Employee Handbook and SEC guidelines, 30-day remediation window, then external filing. I kept my voice level. Everything by the book. Richard turned back to face us. What do you want, Aaron? I want to do my job without being undermined, belittled, or threatened. I want the compliance department to have the authority to actually ensure compliance, and I want protection from retaliation, as guaranteed by federal law. You'll have it, Richard said immediately. Tom, make sure... Actually, Marissa interjected, we'll need that in writing, along with a few other assurances. The negotiation that followed was swift and surgical. Marissa had clearly done this before. Transfer to a different department if I wanted it, I didn't. Restoration of all compliance authorities that had been stripped away under Marcus, a written guarantee of no retaliation, and a conversation about the whistleblower reward provisions under Dodd-Frank, though that would depend on what the SEC ultimately recovered. There's one more thing, Richard said as we wrapped up. Marcus, he's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but he's not going quietly. He's hired counsel, claiming he was following established procedures, that any violations were good faith errors in judgment. The server logs say otherwise, I said. 3 a.m. deletions aren't good faith errors, they're consciousness of guilt. The FBI seems to agree. They executed a search warrant on his home this morning. Thomas closed his portfolio. They found computers, documents, and apparently a rather interesting collection of offshore banking records. So Marcus had been keeping his own insurance. Smart, but not smart enough. Is there anything else we should know? Linda asked. Any other shoes about to drop? I thought about Dennis's USB drive, still locked in my safety deposit box. About Jenna's growing collection of evidence. About Ray, who'd texted me that morning that his attorney was filing a wrongful termination suit with some interesting attachments. I couldn't say, I replied carefully. I only know what I documented. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of follow-up. As I stood to leave, Richard called my name. Aaron. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You tried to tell us, and I didn't listen. You listened to the person you trusted, I said. That's what CEOs do. Maybe, but I should have trusted the person with the evidence. He managed a rueful smile. Lesson learned. I left his office and walked back through the cubicle maze, feeling the weight of eyes tracking my movement. Word would spread within hours the compliance officer who'd brought down the COO, the woman who'd gone toe-to-toe with Marcus Doyle and won. But I hadn't won yet. The investigation was just beginning. The real victory would come when the verdicts were read, the fines were levied, and the message was sent that no one, not even a Harvard-educated COO with a golden smile, was above the law. My phone buzzed as I reached my desk, a text from an unknown number that I recognized as Marissa's burner. Well played. The queen is off the board, but the game isn't over. Stay sharp. I deleted the message and got back to work. There were still vendors to review, flags to raise, and compliance to ensure. Business as usual, except now everyone knew I had teeth. And I wasn't afraid to use them. The email arrived on a Thursday morning, marked confidential, internal only, in red letters that might as well have been sirens. From Office of the CEO, to all staff reorganizational changes, effective immediately. I read it while sipping my coffee, the same bitter breakroom blend I'd been drinking for 12 years, but this morning, it tasted like vindication. Following a comprehensive review by federal investigators and our board of directors, Northgate Capital has agreed to pay $750,000 in penalties for violations of vendor management protocols and securities regulations. We accept full responsibility for these lapses in our control environment. Effective immediately, Marcus Doyle has resigned from his position as Chief Operating Officer to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors. Future endeavors. Corporate speak for, don't let the door hit you on the way to your federal indictment. The email continued with the dominoes I'd expected. 2 procurement directors terminated, the CFO announcing his retirement, To spend time with family. 3 analysts under investigation. The vendor management system would undergo complete overhaul. New controls, new procedures, new oversight. Everything I'd recommended 6 months ago, now written in blood and penalties. Jenna appeared at my desk, eyes bright with something between excitement and awe. Did you see?
I saw.
$750,000. That's about $93 per fraudulent transaction documented, I said. Could have been worse. Could have been 0 if they'd listened to you. She paused, studying my face. You don't look surprised. I'm not. The truth was, Marissa had called me the night before. The SEC had offered Northgate a deal: cooperate fully, pay the fine, implement reforms, and avoid criminal charges against the company itself. The individuals involved weren't so lucky. Marcus was facing wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. The shell company operators he'd partnered with were already in custody. So what happens now? Jenna asked. Now we do our jobs, the way they should have been done all along. The rest of the day played out in surreal normalcy. People whispered in clusters, then fell silent when I passed. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away, probably wondering if they were in my files, if their shortcuts and corner cutting had been documented too. Dennis stopped by around lunch. Heard you're getting a new title, Senior VP of Compliance, with a team of 12. News travels fast. Good news does, he smiled. Also heard Marcus tried to access the building this morning. Security turned him away. Apparently, he wanted to collect some personal items from his office. What kind of items? The kind that were already in FBI evidence bags. Dennis's smile widened. Funny how that works. By 3 p.m., the 42nd floor felt different. Lighter, somehow, as if Marcus's departure had changed the atmospheric pressure. The nervous energy remained, but it was productive now, people actually reading compliance bulletins, double-checking vendor documentation, following procedures they'd ignored for months. Thomas Garrett delivered the official news in person. The board met this morning. Your new position is approved, along with the expanded team and budget. You'll report directly to Richard, no intermediaries. He handed me a folder. There's also the matter of the Whistleblower Award. The SEC recovered significantly more than the fine frozen accounts. Clawed back payments. Your percentage comes to approximately $112,000. I stared at the number. I didn't do this for money. No. You did it because it was right. The money is just the government's way of saying thank you. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Aaron, you saved this company, not just from fines, but from something much worse. Systematic corruption is like cancer, it spreads until it kills the host. After he left, I sat alone in my cubicle, looking at the space where my countdown post-it notes had lived for 30 days. The spot was clean now. No residue, no evidence of my careful tracking of time. My phone buzzed. A message from Ray. Saw the news. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate. I'm buying wrongful termination settlement came through. Then another. From an unknown number. Ms. Calloway. This is Agent Richardson. Wanted you to know Marcus Doyle was arrested this morning. Your documentation was instrumental. Thank you for your courage. Courage. Is that what it had been? It hadn't felt like courage at the time. It had felt like survival, like the only option when faced with willful blindness and institutional rot. David versus Goliath. Except David had a law degree and really good documentation habits. As 5 p.m. approached, I packed up my things, straightening the papers on my desk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding trust, implementing real controls, maybe dealing with resentment from those who'd benefited from the old system. But tonight, I could rest knowing I'd done what needed to be done. Marcus had been right about one thing: I was sensitive. Sensitive to fraud. Sensitive to corruption. Sensitive to executives who thought they were above the law. He'd laughed at my compliance report, dismissed it as meaningless paperwork. Turned out, that paperwork was worth exactly $750,000 in fines, 1 ruined career, and several pending federal indictments. Not bad for a woman who was too sensitive. I shut down my computer, gathered my things, and headed for the elevator. In the reflection of the closing doors, I caught a glimpse of myself, same face, same suit, but standing a little taller now, the senior VP of compliance, heading home after winning a war waged with weapons made of paper and patience. Marcus had wanted to move fast and break things. In the end, the only thing that broke was him. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this story of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed workplace wrongdoing? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments.